The banner read, "Welcome our new sales director," in gold letters 2 feet tall. Grace Sutton stood beside her father at the podium, and the applause rolled toward her in a warm, easy wave. Somewhere in the middle of a sentence she had practiced, she stopped. Across the lobby, past a wall of glass, Adam Reeves walked toward the elevators with a cardboard box against his chest. A dying plant. A photo frame turned inward, his thumb pressed white against the edge of the cardboard. Their eyes met through the glass. Neither of them moved. The applause kept going without her. For 5 years, the name at the top of the sales board had not changed. Reeves, written in dry erase marker, wiped clean every quarter, and written again in the same steady hand because there was never anyone else to put there. Adam did not sell the way the young hires sold. He did not talk fast. He remembered the names of dispatchers and the birthdays of loading dock foremen. He returned calls at 7 in the morning and again at 9 at night, and when a shipment went sideways in a snowstorm outside Cheyenne, he was the one who answered the phone himself. People did not sign with Sutton Logistics, they signed with him. The young hires studied him the way apprentices study a craftsman they cannot quite copy. They noticed he never raised his voice and never missed a quarter. They noticed, too, that in 5 years he had never once asked for a promotion, a corner office, or a title with the word senior in it. Most of them mistook it for a lack of ambition. It was the opposite. It was a man who had already carried more than a title could hold, and had set it down on purpose. At home, none of that followed him through the door. There was only a small kitchen with a window over the sink, and an 8-year-old named Ruby who insisted the pasta water be salted until it tasted like the ocean. He let her stir. She narrated the whole process like a cooking show for an audience of one. He listened as if it were the most important briefing of his day, because to him it was. That was the shape of his life. The board at work, the stove at home. He had made his peace with the size of it. The morning after the ceremony, the piece ended in a conference room with beige walls. Victor Crane sat at the head of the table, president of Sutton Logistics, a man who wore his authority the way other men wore cologne. He slid a folder across the surface without quite looking up. "Standard exit package," Crane said. "Restructuring. Nobody's fault. Sales leadership's consolidating under the new director. You understand." Adam understood more than Crane wanted him to. He read every page anyway. Non-solicitation, account handover, a clause transferring his client relationships to the company of record. He signed where the little tabs told him to sign, because a salesman's book, on paper, had never belonged to the salesman. Grace was there too, near the window, holding a coffee she wasn't drinking. She had insisted on being present. She could not have said why, only that letting him leave without a witness felt like theft done in the dark. "Mr. Reeves," she said, when the folder was closed. "I want you to know this wasn't—" "Congratulations on the promotion," Adam said. Not cold, just finished. He stood, picked up the box he had left by the door, and offered his hand. She shook it. His grip was even, hers was not. When the door closed behind him, Crane leaned back and smiled at the ceiling. "See?" Grace didn't answer. She was looking at the last line of the handover sheet, at the column that listed the firm's largest account by annual revenue. Beside it, in the relationship manager field, one name was printed in plain type, Reeves, A. She kept looking at it long after Crane had left the room. 3 days later, a black pickup with mud on the fenders pulled into Adam's driveway, and a big man in a canvas jacket climbed out like he owned the street. Walt Hendricks was 70 years old and ran the largest independent distribution network between Denver and Salt Lake City. He did not make house calls. He made other people drive to him. "You quit," Walt said, on the porch, refusing the offered chair. "Nobody told me. I had to hear it from a dispatcher." "It wasn't your business to be told," Adam said. "The hell it wasn't." Walt jabbed a thick finger at the doormat. "You know why my freight has run through Sutton for 5 years? Not because of Sutton. I couldn't pick their chairman out of a lineup. It runs through Sutton because a man I trust picks up the phone at 9 at night. That's the whole contract, son. The rest is paperwork. Here was the thing the applause had missed. 12 years earlier, before the beige conference rooms, Adam Reeves had built a freight brokerage firm out of a rented office and a used server, and by the time he was 35, it moved more tonnage across the Mountain West than companies 4 times its age. People in the industry had known his name the way they knew weather. Then his wife got sick, and then she was gone, and a man cannot run a war room and sit at a hospital bedside at the same time. He sold his stake. He stepped down. He took a quiet job with steady hours at a company that had once tried to buy him out, and he let the industry forget him on purpose. Walt had not forgotten. Walt had followed him there. "I've got a standing offer," Walt said. "Come run logistics for my whole operation. Name your number. I'll have a contract to you by Friday." Adam looked out at the yard, where a bicycle lay on its side in the grass. "I've got a kid who's finally sleeping easy again," he said. "I'm not chasing another war." "Thank you, Walt, truly. But no." Walt studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded, the way men nod when they respect an answer they hate. "All right. But you should know something." He stepped down off the porch. "When my renewal comes up next spring, and you're not there, I'm not signing again. I'm not going to explain that to anybody at Sutton. Let them figure it out." He drove off. The mud on his fenders was the last thing to leave the street. That evening, Adam and Ruby sat on the back step and split a bag of pretzels while the sky went orange behind the neighbor's roofline. Ruby had lost a tooth at lunch and could not stop testing the gap with her tongue. "Are we poor now?" she asked, not worried, just curious in the way of children who have never once been hungry. "No," Adam said. "Are we sad?" He thought about it honestly, because she deserved an honest answer. "No," he said, and found that it was true. She leaned against his arm. He put the pretzel bag between them and let the quiet do the rest. What none of them knew, not Grace, not the chairman, not Crane, counting his clean quarter, was that a load-bearing Wall had just walked out of Sutton Logistics on a pair of worn boots, and Walls do not announce themselves when they go. They only announce themselves later, when the ceiling begins to come down. Winter came, and then the long thaw, and the year turned the way years do when no one is watching the calendar. Adam did not go back to war, but he did not go idle either. Word travels quietly among people who move freight for a living. A trucking co-op outside Fort Collins wanted its routing looked at. A cold storage outfit wanted 2 days of his time. He took the small jobs, the ones he could do from the kitchen table after Ruby was asleep, and none that required a suit. He coached her soccer team on Saturdays and burned the pancakes on Sundays and told himself, most days successfully, that this was enough. At Sutton Logistics, the year did not turn so gently. Grace had inherited a sales floor that ran, on paper, like a machine. But paper and floor were beginning to disagree. 2 mid-size accounts drifted to competitors and did not come back. A third renewed at terms so thin they barely covered the cost of serving it. Every month, she asked for the pipeline numbers, and every month Crane's team delivered a report that looked healthy and felt like a photograph of a room she had never been allowed to enter. She started reading the raw files herself, after hours, when the floor was dark and the cleaning crew ran their vacuums 2 zones over. That was how she found the client book, the real one, the relationship map that predated the polished dashboards. Account after account traced back to a single name, Reeves A., Reeves A., Reeves A., and beside the largest of them all, a note in an old assistant's handwriting, Relationship personal. Do not reassign lightly. Grace sat with that for a long time. She had assumed, the way you assume the sun, that the top salesman had simply been good at his job. She had not understood that the job and the man were the same object, and that the company had let it walk out the door and called it restructuring. She pulled his old personnel file. There was almost nothing in it, a resume trimmed to 2 lines, a start date, a string of quarters at number 1. Whoever Adam Reeves had been before Sutton, the file did not say. It was less a record than a door someone had closed on purpose. Crane found her there once, at 8 at night, the client book open under her desk lamp. "Homework?" he said. "Easy," smiling. "Due diligence," she said. "Careful with the old files." He tapped the edge of the book with one knuckle. "Half of that is sentiment. The man's gone. Accounts are the company's, not the salesman's. That's why we have the handover." He straightened. "You're the director now, Grace. Directors look forward." He left. She did not close the book. It took her 3 more weeks to do the thing she had been circling. There were open questions on the handover routing preferences, a dispute code no one could decipher, notes only the previous manager would understand. It was, technically, her job to close them. She found his number in the exit file and typed a message 4 times before she sent it. "Mr. Reeves, this is Grace Sutton. I have some handover questions on the Hendricks account that no one here can answer. I'd appreciate 20 minutes of your time." "I understand if the answer is no." The reply came the next morning, 3 words long. "What time works?" She read it twice. It was the first time in a year that a Sutton problem had felt, even slightly, solvable. They met at a diner off Colfax, neutral ground, a place with vinyl booths and coffee that never stopped coming. Grace arrived with a folder of questions and the intention of staying strictly inside it. Adam answered each one plainly. The dispute code was a weather exemption from a bad winter 3 years back. The routing preference existed because Walt's oldest warehouse had a loading dock that couldn't take a 53-foot trailer before 10 in the morning. Small, human things, none of them written anywhere a dashboard could find. "Whoever built your reports doesn't know any of this," Adam said, not unkindly. "Just a fact set on the table." "I'm learning that," Grace said. For 20 minutes, they stayed professional. And then, because the coffee kept coming and neither reached for the check, they stayed a little longer. She asked him nothing personal. He offered nothing. But when she mentioned, almost in passing, that 2 accounts had slipped that quarter, she saw him do the math behind his eyes in about a second, and she understood she was sitting across from a different order of mind than the org chart had ever admitted. "You didn't just sell," she said. "It wasn't a question." "I closed the folder," Adam said, nodding at hers, "so you'd stop hunting for a villain in a routing code." "It's not the code." They shook hands in the parking lot. Same even grip as a year ago. This time hers held steady. 2 days later, the Hendricks renewal packet came back to Sutton Logistics unsigned, with a single line typed under the signature block. "We'll be reviewing our options this cycle. W. Hendricks." On the floor, it landed like a dropped tray in a quiet room. The Hendricks account was not the largest by a little. It was the largest by a lot, enough that its absence would show up not on a sales report but on the company's line of credit. Crane handled the chairman personally. Harold Sutton was 74, silver-haired, still handsome in the way of men who had spent a lifetime being listened to. He had built Sutton Logistics from 3 trucks and a handshake, and somewhere along the way he had begun to trust the man who told him what he wanted to hear over the numbers that told him what was true. "Hendricks is doing what he does every cycle," Crane said, sliding a chart across the chairman's desk, a chart that showed pipeline replacements neatly filling the gap, deals that were, on close inspection, either half the size or entirely imaginary. "He rattles the cage for a discount. We hold firm, he re-signs in April. Meanwhile, the new director's building the future." He let that sit. "Grace is doing fine, Harold. Give her room." The chairman looked at the chart. He wanted to believe it. Wanting to believe a thing, at his age, had quietly replaced the harder work of checking it. "Fine," he said. "Give her room." Down on the floor, Grace was looking at the same gap in a very different document, the raw one, and coming to a very different conclusion. The chart in her father's office and the book under her lamp described 2 companies that could not both exist. Only one of them was real. She was beginning to suspect she had been hired to run the other. She called him again. This time there was no folder to hide behind. "I need your help," Grace said, and hated how the words sounded, and said them anyway. Walt won't renew. You know why. I think you're the only person who can talk to him. There was a silence on the line long enough that she checked the screen to see if the call had dropped. No, Adam said finally. She had expected it, and it still landed hard. Because of how they treated you. No. His voice stayed level. If it were about that, I'd enjoy watching. It isn't about that. A pause. Grace, if I call Walt and lean on our friendship and he signs to do me a favor, what have you got? A year of borrowed time and the same company underneath it. Next spring you're right back here, except now you've spent the one favor I've got, so you won't help. I'm telling you the account isn't the problem. She could hear him choosing his words. You don't have a sales problem. You have a house that's rotting from the beams out, and somebody keeps handing you fresh paint. Save the account, the house still falls. Fix the house, the account comes home on its own. Then tell me how to fix the house. I don't work there anymore, Adam said. That's not a wall I'm allowed to touch. It was the closest he came to bitterness, and it wasn't bitterness at all. It was a boundary, drawn clean. A man declining to reach back through a door shut in his face, not out of spite, but because he had a daughter and a life he had built, precisely so he would never again be the person a failing company called at 9 at night. Okay, Grace said quietly. Okay, I'm sorry I asked. Don't be. Then, after a moment, softer. You're asking the right question of the wrong person. Ask it inside the building. Ask who benefits when the numbers look good and the company gets worse. He ended the call. Grace sat in her dark office and let his last sentence circle the room. Ask who benefits. She had spent a year assuming the rot was bad luck. Drifting accounts, a difficult market, a salesman who had left for reasons she had been told, again and again, were nobody's fault. Restructuring, consolidation, the words had been handed to her so smoothly, she had never turned them over to see what was printed on the back. Now she turned them over. Who had drawn up the restructuring that pushed out the one man holding the largest account? Who had written the handover that transferred a personal relationship as if it were office furniture? Who delivered the healthy charts? And who had chosen a director with a famous last name and no idea where the bodies were buried? The same man had answered every one of those questions. She had simply never lined them up before. She thought about her own promotion, the applause, the banner in gold letters. She had believed, that day, that her father had seen something in her. For the first time, she let herself wonder whether someone had needed a face on the podium that would keep the room looking at the stage and never at the man walking out with a box. She did not sleep that night. She started making a list. Lorraine Kessler had been the office manager at Sutton Logistics for 26 years, which meant she had filed, sorted, and quietly outlasted 4 vice presidents, 2 recessions, and 1 very expensive lawsuit that had taught the company to keep everything. That was her job now, in the last stretch before retirement, keeping everything. The firm had put her in charge of digitizing 3 decades of company records, memos, letters, archived email for legal retention, box after box carried up from storage, scanned and indexed, because an outfit that had once been sued had learned never to throw a piece of paper away. She had noticed things over the years. Lorraine always noticed things. She had also learned that a woman 2 years from her pension does not go looking for trouble that outranks her. But Grace had started coming to her. Small questions at first, then real ones. And Grace, unlike the man who now signed Lorraine's timesheets, said thank you and meant it. So, on a Thursday evening, when the floor had emptied, Lorraine set a plain manila folder on Grace's desk and stepped back from it like it was warm. You didn't get this from me, she said. I'm too old to be brave. But I'm too old to pretend too, and lately those 2 things have stopped fitting in the same body. Inside were printouts. The first was a memo, 3 years old, in the chairman's own hand at the bottom, initialed and dated. A succession plan for sales leadership, One name was written in the line for director. It was not Grace's name. It was Adam's. The second was a performance review of Adam Reeves, dated 8 months before the ceremony, describing an at-risk book, declining relationships, a salesman coasting on old accounts. It was signed by Crane. It contradicted, on every line, the numbers in the real client book. It was not a review. It was a weapon, built to give the chairman a reason to tear up his own memo. The third was an email chain. Crane, to a contact in an executive search firm, 11 months before the ceremony. We need a director hire that reads as continuity, ideally family. Someone the board won't question and the floor won't fear. Keep Reeves clear of the succession conversation entirely. Grace read it twice. Then a third time. Because the floor seemed to tilt under the desk, she had not been chosen. She had been cast. Her promotion had never been about what her father saw in her. It had been a door built to swing shut on Adam Reeves, and she had walked through it smiling, holding a speech she had practiced. While a man carried 5 years of his life out to the parking lot in a cardboard box, she thought she would feel used, and she did. But underneath the anger was something steadier, something that surprised her by how much it felt like relief. For a year she had believed the failing company was, in some private way, her fault. It was not her fault. She had been handed a wheel that wasn't connected to anything. And somewhere across town was the one other person in this story who had been moved across a board by the same hand. "Lorraine," she said. Her voice was very calm. "Can these be authenticated?" "Metadata, originals, the chairman's initials. The originals are in the boxes I've been scanning," Lorraine said. "They've been there the whole time. Nobody ever thought the office manager would read what she filed." Grace closed the folder. "They were wrong about a lot of people," she said. She drove to Adam's house that Saturday with the folder on the passenger seat and no clear idea of how to begin. She began by handing it to him on the porch and saying nothing. He read, standing up. She watched his face, which did almost nothing, except that near the end his jaw set and stayed set. When he finished, he looked at the memo with his own name on it for a long moment. "I knew he wanted me gone," Adam said at last. "I didn't know your father had wanted me to stay." He handed the folder back. "That's the part that'll hurt him, not the fraud that he signed against his own judgment because a man he trusted told him to." "I want to take it to the board," Grace said. "All of it. But a memo and a hostile review aren't enough. Crane will say the review was honest and the memo was old thinking. I need the numbers to prove the review lied." "Then we prove the review lied," Adam said. And there it was Neither of them noted it out loud. They worked at his kitchen table for 2 weekends. Adam knew where the real figures lived, the shipment logs and the margin sheets that couldn't be dressed up because the bank saw them too. Grace had access to the polished reports Crane's team produced. Laid side by side, the gap wasn't interpretation. It was arithmetic. Every quarter, Crane had reported Adam's accounts as declining. The actual freight volume had held or grown. The review hadn't shaded the truth. It had inverted it. "This," Grace said, tapping 2 columns that should have matched and didn't, "is the whole case." "This is half the case," Adam corrected. "The other half is Walt. A document says the account was healthy. Walt says why it's leaving. One's a spreadsheet. The other's a man the board can look in the eye. Will he come? For you?" "No." A faint, almost smile. "For the truth. And because I ask him, he'll come." It was in the middle of the second Saturday, elbow deep in margin sheets, that a smaller person appeared in the kitchen doorway holding a board game with a torn box. "The instructions are gone," Ruby announced, with the gravity of a national emergency, "and Dad plays wrong on purpose." "I play strategically," Adam said. "You cheat." Grace laughed before she could decide whether she was allowed to. Ruby looked at her, evidently approved, and set the game on top of the margin sheets. "You be on my team." They played for 40 minutes. Nobody mentioned sudden logistics. Grace lost twice and then, teamed with Ruby against a father who did in fact cheat, won once, and the winning felt disproportionately good. At one point she looked up and caught Adam watching the two of them, and he looked away, and neither of them said anything, and the kitchen was warm, and for a little while the folder on the table was just a folder. Then Ruby went to bed, and it was a case again. Across town, Crane was not sleeping well either. He couldn't have named what had changed. But the director had stopped asking his team for reports and started pulling raw logs herself. The office manager wouldn't meet his eye. He didn't know what was coming. He knew only that after 20 years of the room looking exactly where he pointed, the room had begun, very slightly, to look somewhere else. He started locking his office. He started deleting his sent folder. Guilty men rarely announce themselves either. They only tidy up. The board met on a Wednesday. The night before, Adam and Grace sat in the empty Sutton conference room where a year earlier he had signed his own exit, laying documents in order across the same table. They worked mostly in silence. There wasn't much left to say that the folders didn't say better. Around 11, Grace made coffee in the break room because the meeting room machine had been broken for as long as anyone could remember, and she brought him a cup without asking how he took it, and it was right, and neither of them remarked on the fact that she knew. He squared the last document with the table's edge. She sat down across from him. The building settled the way buildings do at night. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Grace said, "thank you. You didn't have to come back into this." "I didn't come back into it," Adam said. "I came back for—" He stopped, looked at the coffee. "It's a good building. It shouldn't be run by a liar." That was not the end of the sentence he had started. They both heard the part he had cut. Neither reached for it. But she held his gaze a beat past professional, and he did not look away first, and something moved across the table that had nothing to do with the documents on it. Then she gathered the folders, and he stood, and the moment closed itself gently, the way a door eases shut when no one wants to hear the latch. He walked her to her car. "Get some sleep," he said. "You two." Neither of them would. They did not know that Crane had spent his own evening on the phone. He was not a stupid man, and stupid was the only thing that could have saved him. He had felt the floor shifting and gone looking for a weapon, and found one in the paperwork he'd designed himself. The non-solicitation clause. Adam Reeves had signed a document promising not to poach Sutton's clients for 18 months, and the largest client in the book was, at that very moment, refusing to renew. By morning he had a narrative and a lawyer's letter to back it. Reeves quit the day he didn't get the top chair, he would tell the board. He signed a non-solicit on his way out, and now he's helping himself to our biggest account, using a director he has clearly gotten to. That's not a whistleblower in your conference room. That's a competitor and a conflict of interest, and if this board is smart, it shows them both the door before this becomes a lawsuit we lose. It was a good lie. It used every true fact and pointed all of them the wrong way. Walt was leaving. Adam had signed the clause. Grace had gone to his house. Each fact was a stone, and Crane had spent the night stacking them into a wall. Grace arrived at 7 the next morning to find that wall already built, the board already whispering behind it, and her father at the head of the table looking older than she had ever seen him. The room she had to walk into had been arranged, before she opened the door, to see her and Adam as the criminals. She squared the folder against her chest, the way a man once squared a cardboard box, and went in. Crane spoke first, and spoke well. He laid his stones one at a time: the unsigned renewal, the signed non-solicit, the director's private visits to a former employee's home. By the time he finished, half the table was looking at Grace the way you look at someone who has disappointed you. "Before we vote on anything," Crane said, "I'd suggest we consider legal exposure, and whether the director belongs in this room at all." "She stays," the chairman said. It was the first firm thing he had said all morning. Grace did not argue Crane's story. She dismantled it. She put 2 columns on the screen, Crane's reported figures beside the bank-verified freight logs, quarter by quarter, for 3 years. This is Mr. Crane's review of Adam Reeves. This is what actually shipped. He didn't report a decline. He manufactured one. She advanced the slide. My father's succession memo, in his own hand, names Reeves as director, and Mr. Crane's email, 11 months before my promotion, arranges a hire that would read as continuity and keep Reeves out of the conversation. She let it sit. I wasn't promoted. I was placed. So was every number this board has seen for 2 years. The room was very quiet. Crane recovered fast. A hostile employee and a manager past her depth. That memo is old thinking. The clause Reeves signed is not, and he is actively taking our largest account. The door opened. Lorraine Kessler set a banker's box on the table. The originals, she said, to the board, not to Crane. Scanned, dated, every one. I've filed this company's paper for 26 years. I know what's real. Behind her came Walt Hendricks, who had not driven to anyone's office in a decade. Nobody solicited me, Walt said before he had even sat. Reeves told me to stay. I'm leaving because the man I trusted left, and I don't sign with companies that push out the only reason I was there. You want to sue somebody over my freight? Sue me. I'll bring my own lawyer and that review, and we'll read them to a jury together. The wall of stones came down all at once. The chairman rose. He looked at the memo on the screen, his own hand, his own initials, a decision he had made and let a smoother man talk him out of. He did not look at Crane. He looked at his daughter, then past her, to the empty chair by the door where, a year ago, a box had waited. The vote, Harold Sutton said, is whether Victor Crane remains president of this company. It was not close. 7-2. Crane gathered his things with the stiff dignity of a man who has run out of rooms that will look where he points. At the door he turned, but there was nothing left to say that anyone would believe, and he left. The chairman sat back down heavily. I signed against my own judgment, he said, to everyone and no one. A man told me what I wanted to hear, and I let him, because it was easier than checking. He looked at Grace. I owe an apology I don't know how to make. You can start, Grace said, by making the right call this time. She was standing beside the door when she said it, not below the podium. Beside it, and when the board turned to ask what the right call was, they turned to both of them, the director and the man she had brought in from the parking lot. They offered him the president's chair. He turned it down. I don't want Crane's job, Adam told the chairman, in the office where a year before another man had spun charts. I've run a war room. I know what it costs, and I've got someone at home who already paid the last bill. He set his terms plainly, the way he said everything. He would come back to build and lead a single division, a relationship management group, the human layer no dashboard could replace as a partner, with equity, on a contract that could not be rewritten by anyone he didn't trust. Take it or leave it. Harold Sutton took it. He would have taken more. Walt Hendricks re-signed within the month and did not ask for a discount. The line of credit steadied. The polished charts went in a drawer, replaced by numbers that were merely true. The floor felt the change before anyone put words to it. Deals that had been slipping for a year quietly stopped slipping. Old clients who had drifted called to ask, a little sheepishly, whether Sutton was taking freight again, and the answer was always yes. Lorraine Kessler finished her scanning that spring, took her pension, and on her last day left a single sticky note pressed to the corner of Grace's monitor. It read, in careful block letters, "Good." Grace kept it there long after the glue gave up. Grace stayed director, but the word meant something now that it hadn't when it came printed on a banner. She and Adam ran the sales floor between them. His instinct and her structure, and the arguments they had were the good kind, the kind that made the work better and left no wound. They never discussed what had moved across the conference table that night. There was no declaration, no moment either could have pointed to and named. There was only a slow accumulation of small things, coffee that arrived correct without being ordered, a parking spot saved, a hand that lingered half a second on a folder as it passed from one of them to the other. On a Sunday in early spring, Grace came by the house to drop off a routing file that could have waited until Monday. Adam was on the back step with a bag of pretzels and a daughter who had grown an inch since the last time it mattered. "You be on my team," Ruby said to Grace, as if a year had not passed. She patted the step beside her. Grace looked at Adam. Adam looked at the yard, where a bicycle lay on its side in the grass, and then at her, and moved the pretzel bag to make room. She sat down. The sky went orange behind the neighbor's roofline. Nobody said the important thing, because the important thing was already sitting on the step, splitting a bag of pretzels 3 ways, and saying it out loud would only have made it smaller. For a year he had been the number they couldn't replace. She had stopped seeing a number long before that.